voice. So, there are some questions that I have received about the voice of the author. So, there's this whole thing about the voice of the author versus the voice of a character. Now, depending on what type of story you're writing, we're going to talk fiction stories. Non-fiction, the voice of the author should be professional at all times. You should know who your audience is and who you are pretending to be or actually trying to be. If you're a college professor, you got to talk like a college professor in your book. You know, if somebody comes out in a book and they sound like a stoner, you better be a stoner. That better be what this book is about, because otherwise your audience is going to be like, what the heck is going on here? Now for fiction, the rules get a little blurry. So the question is this a first-person story or a third-person story? Now a first-person story is I went to the store and it was a really hot day and I got my milk. Third person is, it was a really hot day and James had to go to the store and buy some milk. So the question of your voice is going to be found depending on that kind of thing right there. First person stories, your voice is literally the main character telling the story. And in that kind of situation, the voice of your writing style should be that of the main character. My favorite first-person story is The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, and Harry Dresden is literally telling the story. And so the voice of the narrator is Harry Dresden, which works really well because Harry Dresden is a very navel-gazy kind of character. He does a lot of thinking. He does a lot of retrospecting. He does a lot of considering and, sitting there letting his brain tumble around as he tries to figure out how to solve the mystery and how to move forward to the next part of the story. And it's good because not only does it give you information, but also Harry Dresden is a hilarious smart aleck. And he's the kind of guy I wouldn't mind hanging out with. In fact, I've got a really good friend who's very much like Harry Dresden. And that's, to me, when it comes to first-person stories, your character has to be interesting and likable beyond all other types of stories because you're literally in this person's head. And if you get into a character's head and you can hear the wind whistling through the ears, that's not exactly interesting. Now, if you have a third-person story and your main character is all kinds of dumb, you can cover it up with the fact that you have a professional narrator telling you about what's going on. Now, third-person stories, I've got a bunch of rules that I have to follow. Rule number 1, no contractions. You don't say, John couldn't reach the store that day, or John couldn't go to the store that day. He just didn't have enough time. You would not say it that way. Now, if you were a first person or second person is where a character in the story is telling you the story. Usually you'll start with first or third person and then somebody starts telling you a story. Or there's actually a certain amount of biographies and stuff like that that'll do that. Let me tell you about James Brown. I was there. In that particular situation, that's a second person voice. They're literally telling you a story. So once again, you can use the narrator's accent to flavor your text. But the third person narrator is professional at all times. So no contractions. Instead of can't, you have to say cannot. So wasn't, was not. You got to remove those apostrophes. Let's see here. What are some of the other rules? No swearing. That's a thing that I always just, every time I see it, I'm like, no, if a character swears, that's one thing, but the narrator should not swear. I say, and the only time the narrator has permission to swear is if the narrator is quoting something, or if there's a particular type of slang, and a character is observing through the lens of the slang. Okay, there may be a handful of situations you can get away with that, but I think it reduces the quality of the writing, and also it limits your audience, because there's a lot of people offended by cussing. And if your text has a lot of cussing in it, you're limiting your audience. And that's one of those things that very quickly, especially once you have kids, once you have kids, it's like, really, do you want your kid reading this thing that's full of cussing? Well, no, you don't. And I know a lot of people who are like, oh, I wouldn't care. It's like, then you become a parent and all of a sudden you care a whole bunch. So, because, I am a parent and I didn't care until I did. Now I care a whole bunch. So, always keep yourself clean. And remember, it's okay for the characters to say it, but the author, the narrator, that's where you've got to make sure that you are following your rules, making sure that your writing is clean, easy to follow, and you're not sounding like a knucklehead, because nobody wants to do that. Unless that's what you're going for, in which case, may the force be with you.